The heavy door closed behind Helios, and light poured in through the window in the corridor. He took a step forward, breaking the beam of moonlight with his foot. A heavy, old voice lingered in his ears. It said,
"Now that you've found him, get rid of him."
The shriveled finger stroked the ring. In the darkness, the man rigidly glanced at everyone at the round table, finally locking his gaze on one man.
Troublesome.
Hades leaned against the doorway to the corridor, then took a few steps forward, blocking Helios's path.
If you're planning to do what he asked of you, how about doing my part too?
Helios glanced at him coldly. Offering no response, he lifted his hand and gestured for Hades to make way. As the two men passed, Hades laughed darkly.
By the way, I heard you saved a woman last time, right?
Helios's gaze suddenly became cold, and the silver moonlight frosted over in his eyes. He knew exactly what Hades meant by last time. It was his second encounter with the girl. He had been sitting on a high railing, concealing himself in darkness, and watching the girl awkwardly attempt to cut herself free from the rope. It had seemed a little ridiculous to Helios how careful she was being, but somehow he had found himself feeling unusually concerned for her safety. The sharp blade was so close to the girl's skin that she could easily miss the rope and cut herself. He had already thrown a stone by the time she had become aware of his presence, which was followed by a long, awkward stare-off between the two of them. Helios remembered eliminating 3 stalkers before they reached the warehouse, and yet he wasn't sure if Hades knew more. So he just glared at him and sneered, his gaze growing increasingly more fierce.
"Are you threatening me? Don't assume that I don't know what you've secretly been up to."
Just thought I'd mention it. Do you think this is a threat?
Hades laughed, but his smile soon disappeared, leaving only malice in his eyes.
The old man may be overcautious, but I thought at least you understood. Now it seems to me that having been the sun for too long, you have forgotten how to survive on this side.
Dark clouds converged, obscuring the moonlight. The still corridors loomed ominously in complete darkness.
Don't try to stop me.
I don't have time to waste on you.
Without giving Hades even one more glance, Helios walked into the darkness. It was still dark in the early hours of the morning, and the wind rattled across the rooftop. Helios turned on the computer, his fingers swiftly typing on the keyboard. A curious young man leaned in close, trying to get a view of his screen. Several dense lines appeared on the black screen, and the flow of numbers and letters dazzled the young man. Suddenly, the screen flickered, and a 3-dimensional map appeared in the center. Within the map, a red dot was on the move.
This is...
The man looked extremely surprised. He studied the screen even more attentively, and laughed when he spotted the skull mark on the east side of the map.
This traitor probably still doesn't know that we're onto him. Now we just need to wait for him to walk into our trap.
Because he had never executed such an easy kill mission, the man looked back and forth between Helios and the computer screen, gasping in admiration.
Wow, you're amazing! I hope that we can cooperate again in the future. By the way, I'm actually a Kiro fan. I had one of his albums from before.
Shut up.
The man shut up and raised his hand, smiling apologetically. Helios glanced over and tossed the computer directly at him. The man quickly caught it, watching Helios head to the rooftop exit without looking back. He yelled after him.
Where are you going? That traitor...
He wanted to catch up to him, but didn't dare to take another step.
Do you know what happened to the last person who was sent to watch me?
The man swallowed nervously at the piercing chillness of Helios's voice.
Don't leak what you shouldn't.
Helios walked out of the building and dove straight into the narrow alley. Finally, even the moonlight couldn't catch him. He put on a hat and walked on in silence, but he suddenly recalled what the man said just now. Kiro, fans, albums. He hadn't heard these words in a long time, but the distant memories flooded him in an instant. A cheering crowd appeared before him, and his ears pulsed with music. Helios hastened his pace. He drove all the images and sounds out of his mind, trying to convince himself that Kiro didn't exist. At 1 a.m, he finally reached his destination. Looking at the building surrounded by a gray fence and barbed wire, Helios smiled. Such shabby camouflage. He walked towards the special task force. Helios examined the item in his hand. It was a small black box which seemed to blend into the surrounding darkness, yet flowed with colorful light. This is it. Helios put the black box in place and took one final glance at the messy safe he had just searched, when suddenly he noticed a photograph. Although it was only a blurry profile, he recognized the person in the photo. It was the girl who he had previously rescued. Next to the picture of the girl, there was also a thick stack of documents. Special Task Force is investigating her? Helios remembered the first time he met the girl. He knew she was special almost instantly. She had a powerful but pure strength that had never been used. Obviously, Special Task Force had discovered this, and perhaps even had further plans in place. Thinking about this, he couldn't help but feel restless. He frowned as he turned the pages and read on. Just then, he heard footsteps approaching. Tisk. Helios took one last glance at the stack of documents and turned to leave. What he didn't expect was how soon the girl in the photo would reappear before him. The girl, eyes wide with surprise, was unsure of what to do. She blinked absent-mindedly like the last time they had met. It wasn't until she heard the approaching footsteps that she quickly spoke.
Excuse me, can you do me a favor?
From the footsteps, he knew there were a lot incoming. What's worse, he was actually injured, so leaving without her was undoubtedly the best choice. Helios remained silent for a while, reached out, then pulled the girl behind him and turned to face the special agents in pursuit of the girl. A gleam of gold flashed across his sullen eyes.
I command you all.
This should be all right for now. Helios compressed his bleeding right arm and looked back at the girl, only to find her in complete disbelief. He could see shock, doubt, uncertainty, but he wasn't sure why her expression was so complicated. She moved her lips and paused before slowly speaking.
Are you...
What is it? He wanted to ask, but a sudden pain in his heart occupied all of his consciousness, and an inexplicable force surged and overwhelmed him. He couldn't breathe.
The anti-evil device was activated. Stop causing trouble here, just go!
The girl froze and pursed her lips. She looked slightly hurt, but quickly became determined. She suddenly reached out and supported Helios's arm over her shoulders, pulling him slowly but resolutely toward the exit.
I'm not going to leave you alone.
The switch was turned off, and in the darkness, her voice was crystal clear, and he felt her warm breath surround him. Stumbling to the car, Helios looked at the girl's nervous face and suddenly recalled that confrontation not long ago. Hades said he saved the girl, but actually, the girl saved him as well. A thin, fragile arm suddenly appeared, blocking the sharp blade. And now, after the violent collision, the flames and sunlight blurred Helios's vision. But that slender arm once again appeared before him. The girl in his arms was in great pain. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she still tried desperately to reach forward, grasping the little black box in her hand. Then she smiled gently. The man snoring in the morning sunlight was awakened by the sound of the open door, and immediately pulled his gun.
Who is that? Helios!
The man stared at Helios, who was covered in wounds and bruises. It took him a while before he recognized him.
It's only been a few hours. Why are you...
So much noise. Finish it.
Under the hat, his silver hair looked a lot brighter in the morning sunlight, and the bloodstains on his forehead and the lightly dressed wounds were visible as ever. Realizing what had happened, the man quickly looked at the computer screen. The flashing red dot stopped at the skull mark, indicating that the prey had been caught. Helios glanced at him again. The man nodded and took out his gun. He smiled a horrible and menacing smile. It was the smile of a hunter. The sun had risen completely. The increasingly bright light drowned out everything that had belonged in darkness. Helios suddenly remembered that day a long time ago. In the darkness, the withered hand touched his head and said faintly,
Become Kiro. Be the so-called sun.
At that time, he had lowered his eyes, nodded blankly, and simply walked out of the night, emitting a false light that was not his own. But today, Helios looked off into the distance, and seeing the dazzling morning light, he remembered the girl. Her faint breath, trembling voice, gentle gaze, and soft murmur made Helios feel as if he was in the most tender dream.
I've got it!
The girl grasped the black box a little tighter and smiled softly. At that moment, he saw the real sun.